Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. Welcome to this Wednesday's reflection. I'm in the chapel. I just brought my laptop in here, so no fancy microphones or cameras or whatever. Um, the lighting's a little bit to be desired, but um, I figured this was the best setting to um, to talk about my reflection today. And if you're looking at the title of this video, and if you're looking at you saw the thumbnail for the video, it's "Have I Become a Monk?" Um, now, am I becoming a monk? No, like an actual monastic, a religious, um, a member of a religious order. No, um, but I've had some time to reflect back on uh, how I'm doing, post major COVID pandemic stuff. I mean, I'm not saying we're out of the woods yet, but I think that um, things are returning to a much more normal pace. Um, and so I have a lot of hope and light there. But what have I been left with in the meantime? Um, I guess I guess the whole point of this is to say that I was reflecting with someone the other day that I had become very comfortable being here in this building, pretty much alone most of the week. Aside from a few people coming in to use the office for church business, and then also maybe for an occasional visitor into the office. Really, when I'm here Sunday through Thursday, um, I'm pretty much the entire time I'm here, really, especially if I'm working in the office. I mean, there just won't be a soul in the building except for me the entire time. And, you know, after my time in seminary, where you're basically, it's like college again, you're surrounded by people all the time who, are, wishing you well in the hallway and having chit chat and whatnot. You can mull over like how you thought you did on a test or how hard this homework was or whatever. It's very, very collegial. Um, and so moving away from seminary was very hard to leave that behind. Um, and then also to move into an isolation where it's just you and your family. And, I love my family, but at the same time, like, I saw a lot of my family and not much of anything else. And we are all in that boat. So, we all kind of got stuck with ourselves and our immediate family members uh, for a year. And then prior to seminary, I was a teacher. And so I was, when I went to work, my job was to talk to people and interact and be up in front of lots of people, constantly changing throughout the day, and then going down the hallway as classes were transitioning, and I was, going to get a cup of coffee or going to lunch or whatever. It was, when I got to lunch, I was sitting at a table full of my colleagues, so it was always conversation. It was, it was a good day to be an extrovert when you're a teacher especially at an elementary school. There's just lots of fun energy around that group of people. Um, anyway, but I realized that I really do. Um, People talk about whether they're extroverted or introverted. And what I've realized is that my mother is very extroverted, my father was very introverted. Um, and I think what I have discovered over my time is that I am naturally, well, I'm backtracking this now, but my point is that um, I get a lot of extroverted energy, but I think deep down in reality, I think I'm probably an introvert. Um, but I get a lot of my recharge from being around people, which is kind of the inverse. A lot of like extroverts, for example, in my experience, you know, go and do and go and do, but then they also need that really hard recharge alone and isolated from people so that they can get back out there and do the thing. I think I'm probably an introvert who needs to go be outside and talking to people every once in a while. I'm not sure about that. Or I'll put it this way. Um, I, I'm probably an extrovert, but when it comes to working, I would rather work on a solo project. That's probably fair. That's probably the best way I can think to explain how I feel about it. Because honestly, things aren't either or. You know, whether you're introverted or extroverted, it's really a both and. It is a spectrum, and we swing along the spectrum. We're not defined as one or other, and there's a clear divide in between, and there the two shall meet. That's not how biology and our minds and the world works. Dualism is great on paper, but honestly, you know, there's a lot of gray in pretty much everything. All right, anyway, all this to say is that over the course of the year, um, I've become very accustomed and familiar with working alone, and and also just not having anyone in the office, even when, you know, no offense to, you know, Emily Rossi, or to Dorothy LeBlanc, or to Lena when she was here, you know, um, or Shannon when he's doing treasurer stuff in the office. I'm glad those people are doing work in the office. I'm glad Sloan is doing food pantry stuff on Fridays. However, I just really like knowing that I'm by myself, and it's like my nice little cubby. And yet, my job is to relate to people, to go visit and to talk and to check in. Um, and so my job is not to be a secluded monastic saying prayers uh, away from the world, set aside and away from the world. And so I wanted to talk to you just a second about one, what are the styles of monasticism, keeping in mind I am not an expert on religious life. I have known several religious in my time, but I do not consider myself an expert. So if there are people out there that know better and would like to correct me in what I'm about to say, please do so. So you basically have different types of monastics. And when I say monastics, I mean what we typically think of as monks and nuns, even though monk is the name of a man who's in a religious order, and is typically like a Benedictine or a Cistercian, or a Carthusian or something like that. A friar or a brother would be one of the mendicant orders, and we'll talk about that later. All right, so you have your monks and your nuns. Nuns we think of as just like a female religious. However, a nun specifically refers to someone who is in a papal residence. Typically, if they were a female religious in a community, they would be a sister. So, for example, at Swanee, where I lived, you had the Sisters of St. Mary, and they referred to themselves as sisters. So they didn't say that they were nuns; they said they were sisters, and that's how we referred to them. There was, Sister Hannah and Sister Mary and whatnot. All right, Sister Felicity. Okay, so you have people who take on a religious life, following, for example, the rule of Benedict or the rule of St. Augustine. And these are sets of rules that you live by that help govern the community that you are in, or help you rule your own life if you're not living in a community of religious, of those who've taken religious orders. Um, so you have what they call the Cenobites, or a Cenobitic community. Um, and those are what you would typically think of as religious orders that live in a set aside community that's kind of set apart from the rest of the world. Um, those would be Benedictines, Cistercians, Trappist monks, Carthusians, one of my favorites. Um, they they live in places that are set aside, away from the world, and they live together and they pray together in community. Now, sometimes those same organizations will have like a chapel attached to them that the local village folk would come and pray at. So for example, you can go and pray, and you might have Benedictines praying in a separate little enclosure with the service. Anyway, then those are your those are like your I guess those would be the Cenobitic communities. Yeah, so those would be your Cenobites. Then you have your mendicant orders, which do follow the same kinds of rules. Those would be like Dominicans and Franciscans and the Poor Clares, some Augustinians. They work in the world in a way that like Benedictines and Cistercians and Carthusians don't. Dominicans and Franciscans are the most recognizable mendicant orders. And their job is to not necessarily stay in one spot and say, this is where we're going to build our prayer community. They work in the world as preachers and as social workers and teachers and whatever. But that's not to say, now, so all that to be said, you kind of have to know the rules before you can break them. There's Benedictines that work out in the world in a way. Like in Natchez, we have a small Benedictine community. I've got a friend who's a Cistercian monk in Dallas, and he's a teacher by day. But after he's done teaching at this Cistercian school, he goes back to his Cistercian house. And so the Dominicans and Franciscans work in the world. They have an intentional work into the world that is not quite the same as like the Benedictines and Carthusians and Trappists. Anyway, so those are Cenobitic communities. They separate themselves from the world, but they do so in community, and they pray as a community, whether they be comprised of male or female religious. A flip side of that would be the hermit. This was a much more is an old style version of religious life. So they were the Eremitic religious, and those would be what we would call hermits. They would basically seclude themselves alone and live a self-sustaining life, and pray and contemplate, and that was how they found their fulfillment with God. And so those were a very old school style. I mean, I'm not saying they don't have Eremitic religious nowadays. I imagine they do. I know that, like Thomas Merton, for example, he was a Trappist or a Cistercian. I think he was a Trappist. He was a Trappist monk. Anyway, he's one of the more famous authors, religious writers in the past 100 years. He lived in a community in Kentucky, I believe, but then also in a very odd kind of twist, asked to live in seclusion in that community. So he got his own little space away from everybody else, and at least for a few years lived like in seclusion, with little connection, I guess for resupply and things like that. But he was a prolific writer, and then of course he ended up traveling and speaking a lot. So like he was living this eremitic life, but also was one of modern theology's greatest contemplatives and writers. An even older form of religious life would be the skete, Skete. You see that a lot more in Eastern Christianity, and I don't know much about it. Basically, I've read a Wikipedia article about it, but it would be a secluded community of religious, but also that had regular commerce with the outside world, and had travelers come in and go, like that. And so it was more of like a hybrid, like relating to the world, but also doing it from a fixed location. So they weren't traveling the world like the mendicants do, but they were established in a spot, but also had regular commerce with the outside world. You see this a lot more in, again, the Eastern Christianity. And then you have, very ancient forms of religious life, and that would be the Lavritic. A lavra is a sort of like an alleyway of caves that hermits would live in. So it's sort of like, it's like a collection of hermits that live in and near each other, but I would imagine, aside from basic, physical sustaining, like helping each other, like eat and live and work, that it's pretty much everyone does their own thing. Again, that was a very, very old style of monastic life. I would think of like the ancient desert fathers, especially in the Egyptian area, where you would go out into the deep wilderness and you would find a little valley with caves dug out in the rock, and you'd see 10 hermits living in a valley alongside one another. Anyway, that's my thought on that. Very old school, very what you would think of in like the early 300 years of the church. Talk about the church fathers, things like that, the desert fathers. That's kind of what we're thinking of. Anyway, all this to say is that, I feel like I've lived this contemplative year, and I'm having to relearn how to work with people. Not live with people. Living with people, I can do great. But am I? What is it going to take for me to re-enter the workplace in a much more hustling and bustling way, much more in a way that I was accustomed to in my previous jobs? Obviously, we don't have the biggest offices here, so even if things were in full swing and the pandemic was fully gone, we're not having lots of traffic in and out here all the time. We don't have that need, and yet getting out there and kind of pounding the pavement and finding people is something that I'm going to have to relearn how to do. And perhaps you are in the same boat as me. Maybe your offices have been virtual, or you've been working from distance for a long time now. And now, as offices are coming together, you are figuring out how, is it okay to work together and not have to like lock yourself in your office or your cubicle and not interact with one another. maybe it's just me and I'm talking to nobody. But anyway, that's kind of how I felt a lot. Hopefully we're going to have another parish administrator in the office soon, keeping regular hours, and it'll be weird having a coworker, just on the other side of the door from me, because frankly I've just become very accustomed to enjoying the peace and quiet. Anyway, that's me. So perhaps you've enjoyed learning a little bit about the religious orders, and what a little bit of that is like. If you'd like to know more about the religious life, I've got several sisters we can reach out to and talk to more, or we can talk in more detail about some stuff that I've read. We did when I was in my early 20s, I did a 40-day kind of monastic-esque experience up at Grace Center, and I basically lived following the rule of Benedict for 40 days and studied under a Benedictine monk and some priests. It was 5 young people living as monastics for 40 days. I appreciated it. I think it really gave me a lot. And I'll be happy to talk at further length about that experience at some point. Also, there is a book, Into Greater Silence, is a excellent documentary about Carthusian monks, and there's another book called An Infinity of Little Hours, which I highly recommend. I've actually given away. I bought extra copies to give away, and then I ended up giving away my own copy, and so I got to get another one. Probably one of my favorite books. So if you want to know what it's really like to be a monastic, read that book. Anyway, y'all be well. Other fun news is coming out. Updates here and there. We got our last Bible study tonight for Genesis, here at 6 o'clock at the church. You can either join in person or online via Zoom. Go to redeemerbrookhaven.com/formation, and you'll find a link for that Zoom meeting if you want to join online. Other than that, thank you for joining us, and as always, God bless.